was halfway through my second cup of coffee when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was just past 6 in the morning. Still dark outside. The kind of February dark that presses against the windows like it has weight. I saw my daughter's name and picked up without thinking. She didn't say hello. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then I heard her breathing, shallow, uneven, and a sound like she was trying not to cry and failing at it. "Dad," she whispered. "Dad, I need you." I was already standing up. "Where are you?" "The trail. Behind the house. I can't." I tried to get up, but my ankle. "Don't move. I'm coming." I grabbed my coat off the hook by the back door and my boots, and I didn't tie them properly. Just pushed my feet in and went. It was -14. The kind of cold that hits your face like a slap and stays there. I'm 63 years old and I haven't moved that fast in years. But I didn't feel my age that morning. I followed the path I'd walked 100 times. Past the woodpile, through the gate, into the trail that runs behind the new houses on Riverside, where my daughter lived. I found her about 200 meters in, sitting against the base of a white birch, her left leg stretched out in front of her. She had her husband's old hunting jacket over her shoulders, but it wasn't zipped up and she was shaking. Her face was pale in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. I dropped to my knees in the snow beside her. "Nora, look at me!" She looked at me. Her eyes were unfocused at first. Then they found my face and something in her seemed to break open. "He knew," she said. "Dad, he knew I was out here." I pulled the jacket around her properly and felt her ankle through her boot. Swollen. Not broken, I thought, but I've been wrong before. "We'll talk inside. Can you put your weight on me?" She could, barely. She could, barely. I got her arm over my shoulder, and we walked back slowly. And she didn't say anything else until we were through the gate and I had her sitting at my kitchen table with the heat turned up and a blanket around her shoulders. Then she told me she'd woken up at around 4 because she heard the back door close. Her husband, I call him by what he was to me, my son-in-law, wasn't in bed. She'd gone downstairs and found the door to the yard standing open. She called out to him. No answer. She thought maybe he'd gone to check on the pipes. We'd had a cold snap that week and the house was new construction, not the most reliable plumbing. She went outside to look for him. He was standing at the top of the train. She said she knew immediately that something was wrong. Not wrong like an argument. Not the kind of wrong she'd learned to manage in 3 years of marriage. Something different. He was standing very still with his back to her, and when she said his name, he turned and his face was, she used the word empty, like he'd made a decision and put everything else away. He told her she had no right to be in his family's house anymore. She asked what he was talking about. He said his mother had explained everything. He said the arrangement was over. He said she and the baby could figure out their own situation. Nora was 5 months pregnant. She'd found out in September. She'd been careful about it, hadn't told many people yet, hadn't even told her best friend from university. She was careful because she'd learned to be careful around him, around his family. She tried to walk past him back to the house. He stepped in front of her. She told me this part quietly in a voice that didn't shake, which somehow made it worse. He didn't touch her. He just stood there, and she panicked and stepped backward, and her foot hit an ice patch, and she went down hard on her ankle and slid sideways off the top of the trail embankment. Not far. Maybe 1.5 meters, but the ground was frozen solid. He stood at the top and watched her. Then he went back inside and closed the door. I sat across the table from my daughter and I listened to every word and I kept my face very still. I've had practice at that. I worked 30 years as a rural paramedic in Ontario before my knees gave me a reason to take the desk job I never wanted. I've sat with people in the worst moments of their lives and kept my face still. It is the only useful skill I know. When she finished, I asked her one question. Did he know you were pregnant when he married you? She nodded. And his mother. When did she find out? Nora looked down at her hands. She's always known. Since before we were engaged. She never said anything to his face. She worked on him. The whole time? 3 years, Dad. She worked on him until he believed what she believed. I asked what it was that she believed. Nora's mother, my wife, who died 8 years ago, was Cree. From a community north of Thunder Bay. I'm as white as they come. Scottish and Irish, 4th generation Canadian. Nothing remarkable about my background at all. Our children carry both. Nora has her mother's coloring, her mother's eyes, Her mother's way of going quiet when something matters to her. My son-in-law's mother had a word she used, not to Nora's face, behind closed doors, in conversation with her son, in the text that Nora had never been supposed to see. Mixed, she said it the way some people say it, not as description, as contamination. She spent 3 years convincing her son that the baby Nora was carrying would be a problem. For the family name, for the property, for the inheritance she held over him like a hand over a flame. When Nora finished telling me this, I stood up and went to the window. The sun was coming up over the tree line, which in February in northern Ontario means not much warmth but a particular kind of cold, clear light that I've always found honest. I stood there for a minute. Then I called my brother. He picked up on the second ring. He's 2 years younger than me and lives 40 minutes away in Sudbury, where he retired from the OPP last spring after 32 years. He doesn't say much, but he hears everything. I said, "It's time. I need you." He said, "I'll be there in 40 minutes. I don't want to say we had a plan. We didn't have a plan in the sense of something written down or discussed in advance. But there are things you understand between brothers who've been watching over the same people their whole lives." He knew what I meant. I knew what he'd bring. First, I took Nora to the urgent care clinic in Thessalon. Sprained ankle. Severe. Not broken, as I'd guessed, but the doctor who examined her also noted the bruising along her left side from the fall, the mild hypothermia, and the stress indicators that anyone who's worked in emergency medicine recognizes. She asked Nora twice, carefully, whether anyone had hurt her. Nora said no, and it was technically true, and I watched the doctor write it down and I made a note of her name. My brother arrived at my place while we were still at the clinic. By the time I got back with Nora settled in my spare room, he was sitting at my kitchen table with his laptop open and a coffee he'd made himself. "Tell me everything," he said. So I did. My brother spent 23 years in financial crimes before he moved to rural community liaison work at the end of his career. He understands money the way I understand airways and breathing, as the thing that tells you what's actually happening when everything else looks fine. While I talked, he typed. While he typed, he asked questions I wouldn't have known to ask. When he was done asking, he went quiet for a while. "The house," he said. "It's in his name only." "Yes. She was never added to the title." "When did they buy?" 2.5 years ago. "And before that they were renting." "What happened to her half of the down payment?" I looked at him. "She told me she put in 40,000, I said slowly, "from her mother's estate." My brother nodded and kept typing. He found the property records in about 4 minutes through the Ontario Land Registry. The house had been purchased with a down payment of $80,000. My son-in-law's name was on everything. Nora's name was nowhere. There was a private mortgage registered against the property, not from a bank but from a numbered company. He traced the numbered company to a holding corporation registered in Nora's mother-in-law's name, incorporated 3 months before the house was purchased. She had loaned her son the down payment using her daughter-in-law's money, without Nora knowing, without Nora's consent. The $40,000 Nora had contributed had gone into a joint account in those early months of marriage and then, quietly, out again. My brother leaned back in his chair. "There's your leverage," he said. But that wasn't all. Over the next 2 days, while Nora slept and healed and ate my cooking and called her own doctor in Sudbury to set up a prenatal appointment, my brother kept working. He has contacts he's never explained to me in detail and I've learned not to ask. He made phone calls. He sent emails. He drove to Sudbury one afternoon and came back with a folder I didn't open until he sat down and went through it with me, page by page. The mother-in-law had done this before, not identically. But my son-in-law had been married once previously, briefly, to a woman from Timmins whose family was Ojibwe. That marriage had ended after 13 months. The woman had left with nothing, according to public records. There had been a small claims action that was settled out of court with a non-disclosure clause. She had moved away. My brother had spoken to the family member who would speak to him and confirmed without details that the circumstances had been similar. The pattern was clear. My son-in-law was not operating alone. He was operating as a tool. I want to be honest about what I felt during those days. I'd been asked since then, by my other daughter, by Nora herself, eventually, when she was ready, whether I was angry. The answer is yes, but not in the way people expect. It wasn't hot anger. It was the cold kind. The kind I'd felt twice before in my life. Once when someone threatened my wife and once when something happened to my younger daughter that I'm not going to speak about here. It is the kind of anger that makes you very quiet and very methodical, which is the only kind of anger that's ever been useful in my experience. I'm also going to say this: I did not act outside the law. I want that to be absolutely clear. Everything my brother and I did from that point forward, we did with phone calls and paper and the knowledge of what those documents meant. My brother's first call was to a family lawyer in Sudbury he'd worked with on previous cases involving financial exploitation. She was direct and unimpressed by sentimentality, and she told us within 20 minutes of reviewing the information that Nora had a strong civil claim for the return of her $40,000 plus interest, plus potentially damages under the theory that the money had been obtained by misrepresentation. She also said that the circumstances of Nora being left outside in minus 14 degrees while pregnant by her husband, who knew she was there and chose not to help, warranted a conversation with a crown attorney she knew personally. That conversation happened 3 days later. I'm not going to walk through every step of what followed because some of it is still ongoing and some of it belongs to Nora, not to me. But I'll tell you the parts that matter. My son-in-law, when confronted with the documentation his mother had so carefully arranged to benefit herself, discovered that the same documentation created a very detailed record of financial misconduct. The numbered company, the mortgage, the movement of funds. It was not, in the end, a sophisticated scheme. It was the kind of scheme that works until someone looks at it. And my brother looked at it. The mother-in-law had, in her confidence, been thorough. She had emails. She had records. She kept records of everything, apparently, because she liked to be in control of the narrative. Those records, once a lawyer's letter arrived requesting their disclosure as part of a civil proceeding, became a weight around her neck rather than an instrument of control. The civil action was filed 6 weeks after the morning I found Nora on that trail. The settlement came 4 months after that. Nora's $40,000 came back with interest. There was additional compensation that I'm not going to specify, but that her lawyer described as appropriate. There was no non-disclosure clause. Nora refused one, specifically, so that the next woman, if there was a next woman, might find something if she went looking. My son-in-law did not contest the divorce. He had been advised, I understand, not to. The crown attorney matter is still, as I said, ongoing. I have been told not to discuss the specifics. I was halfway through my second or three does its morning on a frozen trail in February, and going back inside to make yourself a coffee is the kind of thing that sounds worse the more times you say it out loud, and it has been said out loud in rooms where that kind of thing is evaluated carefully. The mother-in-law no longer owns the numbered company or the property it was connected to. I know this because it's public record, and my brother checked. Nora had her baby in June, a girl 7 pounds 4 ounces, born at Health Sciences North in Sudbury on a Tuesday morning, while I sat in the waiting room and read the same magazine page 11 times without registering a single word. They called me in when she was an hour old and I held her, and she looked up at me with her grandmother's eyes, wide and dark and completely certain, the way newborns are, before the world has had time to teach them doubt. Nora named her after her mother, my wife. I'm not going to write that name here because it's private and it belongs to them. I drove home the long way that evening, up through Nyan Center and along the 17, the way I used to drive when my wife was alive, and we needed to talk about something difficult, and driving made it easier. The bush was dark on both sides, and the sky was the particular deep blue it gets in northern Ontario on a clear June evening, the kind of blue that looks like it goes up forever. I thought about 3 years. 3 years my daughter had carried this, had managed it, had found small ways to protect herself while someone worked steadily to convince her husband that she was worth less than she was. I thought about the morning she was on the trail and the door that had been closed against her. I thought about the moment she'd whispered my name over the phone, and I thought about something she said to me the day we drove home from the lawyer's office after the settlement was confirmed. We were stopped at a Tim Hortons on the way out of Sudbury. Because that is what you do. You stop, you get a coffee, you breathe. And she was quiet for a while, and then she said, I keep thinking about what she called me. In those texts. Mixed, like that was the thing that made me less. I waited. But I'm not less, Nora said. I'm exactly what Mom and you made me. I'm both things completely. I always was. I didn't say anything to that. There wasn't anything to add. She is her mother's daughter. She is mine. She is herself. She will raise her daughter the same way, in both languages, on both sides of her history, afraid of nothing. Whatever words were used to describe her blood, and I have my own words for the people who use them. She has always known exactly what it is. And now she has the papers to prove that everyone else was wrong. I've been thinking about the word mixed for a long time now. The way it was used, not as a description of who my daughter is, but as a verdict on what she was worth. I've turned it over in my mind. The way you turn over a stone to see what's underneath. And what I keep finding is this. The people who used that word weren't describing Nora. They were describing their own fear. Fear of what they couldn't control, couldn't categorize, couldn't diminish into something manageable. And fear, when it's left to grow in the dark of a household where nobody questions it, becomes something that acts, that plans, that moves money and closes doors in February at 4 in the morning. What I watched my daughter carry for 3 years wasn't weakness. I want to say that plainly. People ask sometimes, why didn't she leave sooner? Why didn't she say something? Why did she stay? I understand the question, but I think it comes from not understanding how these things work. The erosion is slow. It's designed to be slow. By the time you realize what's been taken from you, you've already been convinced that you weren't worth much to begin with. That's the cruelty of it. It doesn't announce itself. It just moves quietly through a marriage like water through a foundation wall, and by the time you see the damage, the structure has already shifted. But here is what I also know. Nora did not break. She bent badly, and she hit the frozen ground, and she called me. That call, that one decision to reach for someone she trusted, is the thing that changed everything. It takes more courage than most people recognize to ask for help when you spent years being told you don't deserve it. The strength she showed wasn't in fighting back loudly. It was in holding on to enough of herself, through all of it, to know that what was being done to her was wrong. That knowledge, that stubborn, quiet refusal to fully believe the story they were telling about her. That is what I mean when I talk about real integrity. Not a dramatic gesture, just not letting go of the truth about yourself, even when someone is working very hard to take it from you. My brother brought what he brought, decades of understanding how money moves when people are trying to hide something. And he used it precisely and carefully and entirely within the law. I want people to understand that. The most effective thing we did was simply look closely at the paperwork that already existed. The scheme unraveled not because we were clever, but because we were thorough. We asked the right questions. We found the right people. We did not stop. Persistence is underrated. It is quieter than anger, and it lasts longer. The baby is 7 months old now. She has learned to laugh at the dog and to grab whatever is closest to her hand with absolute certainty that it belongs to her. She doesn't know yet about the trail in February, about the closed door, about the word that was used to describe her mother's blood. One day, Nora will decide what to tell her, and how, and when. That's Nora's story to carry forward. What I'll tell her when she's old enough, if she asks me, is that the people who tried to make her mother small ended up very small themselves. Not because the world punished them dramatically, but because that is simply what happens when you build your life on the idea that some people matter less. You end up with less. You end up alone in a house full of paperwork that someone is eventually going to read. And the ones you try to diminish are at a Tim Hortons on the highway, drinking coffee, driving home,